All right, I'm going to talk about 3D audio today. I'm actually a person with a big background in digital music. I worked for Sony Music for many years, overseeing the Americas for them and for Jive Records. And I run an enterprise now that works on partnership activity throughout the globe, actually. I do a lot of work with digital music companies. So VR isn't my principal background, but I've become associated with it through a pretty interesting audio technology that we'll touch a little bit on, basically. But my perspective kind of comes from content, if you will, not terribly from gaming. So hopefully you'll forgive me for that. So let me just show you just like the briefest, 30-second piece on what we're talking about. Hopefully the sound will work.
My name is Edgar Schwery, and I'm a professor of mechanical and aerospace engineering here at Princeton University. Recently, I've been involved academically in acoustics. 3D sound is for you to sit in front of some speakers, ideally 2 loudspeakers only, and be able to play an orchestra or an ensemble or a band, and be able to locate unambiguously the location of each sound source. If you have a choir, you can point to every person in the choir. If you have a symphony orchestra, you can see the viola coming from here, the bass coming all the way from the right. In other words, a 3D audio image of that event.
So that's a professor named Edgar Schwery. He's a Princeton University professor. And, I'm working with a company that has licensed his technology, which we'll talk about in a bit. But what we're talking about is basically, the spatialization of audio, of sound waves, if you will. This is just a little bit of a map that gives you a sense on what it actually is. But this is based on something called binaural audio. So for maybe the one engineer that's in the audience, binaural audio is something that's about 135 years old. It was developed in France originally around Theatrical World Fair or something. And it basically takes stereo recording a step beyond. So it creates these almost ear-like globes, which you use serve as a recording vehicle, and you record audio sound waves in a way that basically tricks our brain into thinking they're into real life. It creates something called externalization. So when I get to VR, you kind of forget that you have a headset on, and you basically feel as though you're in that world. So that's what we're talking about. All this stuff is based on the principle of binaural. So I'm just going to run through some qualitative assumptions about, and that's an example of the dummy about what 3D audio is. So with this enterprise I've been working with, we're trying to partner out in the landscape, a new VR and AR landscape, basically. And what we're finding is there actually isn't that much audio in the market. There are a lot of 360 video solutions and video software providers, but this space is actually quite rare. There aren't so many native 3D audio applications that are out there. So from a business standpoint, it's actually a fairly awesome opportunity. Something we'll touch on a little bit more, but it's almost like audio is the forgotten piece of this universe, basically. It's something that is completely fundamental to the experience, and I'm going to roll through a couple of slides that show you why, if your eyes are looking over there, the audio needs to follow you as well. And if you're in a theater, you need to have an omnidirectional capability as well going on. So it's a completely fundamental part of the landscape. So again, if the engineer in the crowd wants to help me out a little bit, what you're basically doing with 3D audio is taking those cues that come to your ears and transforming them into a VR or an AR environment. I'll show you some other platforms like speakers and headphones as well. And you're just tricking the brain, essentially, through this 3D audio effect that you're actually in that landscape. So that's what we're actually doing. Every time I talk about this or mention it to a business partner, particularly in the media universe, they ask me, why is it better than surround sound? And how is it different than Dolby or Dolby Atmos? What's the difference? It's completely different. So binaural audio is going back to what I just talked to you about. It's this effect of creating this 3D sensation with your brain, basically. Surround sound is just, if we were in a theater, you might have a speaker there, and just, a whole allayed set of speakers that kind of create the illusion of sounds coming from a different, direction. But it's not the same as 3D, basically, nor is Dolby Atmos. I mean, it's actually superior if you're looking for a consumer effect, basically. And then, from this landscape, I've heard a lot of people at this conference talking about gaming and gaming platforms, if you will. But 3D audio is something that I think translates across a lot of different verticals. I mean, it's certainly not limited to virtual reality. I'm going to walk you through some examples of things that I'm seeing in the market as a business developer with the 3D audio technology I'm working with, and there's certainly other verticals about it as well. So you got to think about it way beyond VR. Why is it relevant to VR? I mean, I'll throw a couple of quotes up here from Jaunt, which is a pretty heavily venture-backed, entertainment-oriented VR service in the Bay Area, and from a former colleague at Sony, actually. But what we're doing here is bringing an equally, if not more, immersive experience from audio into the VR landscape, basically. So if you have a VR headset or headset experience and you don't have this audio experience, it's a little, it's going to be kind of lacking, basically. And these are just quotes that kind of show you why it's relevant to it. This kind of looks at the landscape if you're, my perspective is as a business developer trying to create partnership activities. I think if any of you were here for the VR investment panel, one of the people up here really did a beautiful explanation of the value chain in this space. The perspective I'm talking to you about today is sort of on the content side of the landscape, if you will. Where do you go to try and partner with this? And so this looks at, VR markets if you're an audio technology, basically. So, film studios are an obvious partner. From my experience, we're seeing some really extremely interesting discovery and curiosity, even on the part of the very biggest interest in this country from the film studios. I was at Paramount just about 5 months ago for a 3-day private summit with 50 other VR companies, basically. And I think some of these divisions that have theme parks, that have film studios, television businesses are actually looking at this and saying, what do we do? I don't think they have the expertise that's sitting up in this room or at this event really figuring out the landscape. So that's obviously a party that you want to be talking to, and I think those have been very interesting parties. Some of them, for example, at Disney, will have an innovation unit which incubates different companies that they'll try to work across all the different elements of that company and try and help develop partnerships with it. So, and then there are multiple middleware providers, workings of the studio system that are creating content, television companies that are all looking at how do we create for this new medium if we're building a film or a television show, whatever it might be, a unique show. And I think one of the biggest things I've heard from that kind of community is, look, we have production tools that we use, basically. How does this work with Pro Tools? Do we have to spend a lot of money to integrate this stuff, or is it going to be a simple and easy thing to plug and play? Other services that are out there, I mean, you can talk about what an Amazon is doing, for example, or some of the big streaming interest in this, in the ecosystem would have the same interest in having some form of an enhanced audio solution out there, as well. And then maybe some of the obvious things to, the big incumbents in the space, right? A Magic Leap, an HTC, the Oculus, and the Samsung Gear technologies are all potential parties that you could basically place this software on. Like a 3D audio software, quite frankly, does not need to be integrated quite that heavily. It can literally reside, on the hardware and act as almost like a stereo filter, if you will, to kind of position the sound, just as Dr. Schwery was saying, basically. So that's kind of the magic of this. And there might be some creators that don't want, for example, their content to be repurposed. I've sat with some major artists pitching this and major studio producers, and they've expressed some very real concerns about, hey, one guy produced all the Doors records. I wouldn't want to do this if the artist intended a guitar to be heard in this portion of the sound feed and a drum over here. So those are some of the things to be thinking about as well. But that sort of third tier is an obvious list, basically. And then if you just think beyond virtual reality, I mean, there are loads of other partners. I mean, obviously mobile phones, I just asked the gentleman from HTC, are certainly candidates for this. All of them have audio players and want to enhance that audio experience as well. So these are certainly parties, as are some of the headsets that we've just talked about. And then some of the obvious players in augmented and virtual reality. So my background's in music primarily, so I've been out as a business developer with one 3D audio technology in front of a lot of the new ecosystem streaming services. So music as a business has completely shifted from a business where people and kids want to buy CDs and tracks to one that's all about access now. It's really all about paying a premium subscription fee or listening to ads and getting your content for free, more than any purchasing power, if you will. Although there are some download services in the market, but when you think about 3D audio, basically it falls into audio fidelity as a category, and at least in theory, for all of you that have iPhones or carrying around those white headsets, you should at least appreciate that there is something called audio fidelity out there. And for those who do, it's actually quite an enormous difference, basically. So that would be some of the thinking as to why a music service would want to use an audio technology. And if you're trying to sell subscriptions, for example, if you're Spotify and you want to convert some of those, 50 million, whatever it is, free users to a paid model, here's a feature that you might be able to slide on an interface and say, look, I want the high fidelity portion of this stuff, basically, and actually charge for. So that's kind of one of the areas that we've really been focused on as well. The other thing for audio that people don't always think about, but is the car. So I think from a media perspective, it's I think kind of the phone, the TV, certainly online, those are very crowded spaces, but the car itself, particularly if you're looking at entertainment applications, I think has not been conquered yet, if you will. So we've really been looking very closely at the car dashboards and integrating into that and trying to use 3D audio as a vehicle to give better listening experiences, basically. So with the tech I just showed you, and if anyone's interested, I can obviously give you a demo offline, but you can spatialize audio. We could realistically send a lot of you in this room different audio experiences using this technology, actually. And you can do that in an automobile, such that the kids are in the back seat listening to Taylor Swift, and you can have your news up front, and in theory there shouldn't actually be that much crosstalk between the waves. And there are enough interest out in the automotive space, not just the big three, but loads of different entities that are selling and working as intermediaries into the automotive market, that this is a very cool, interesting market for us. And I also mentioned, just before I get to the biz dev, my comments on what we've been seeing is the speaker market, the headset market. The technology I've shown you, we've deployed it actually on the Jambox, actually. And even on the cheapest speakers, if you have a proper technology that's positioned, you can really hear the difference. You can hear, you really can spatialize and widen out and flatten out the sound, basically. So, I've sort of been out in the market trying to do deals. I blogged about it recently on VentureBeat. And, it's one, and I think it was just talked about on the last panel, but it kind of feels like this is a baseball game, like we're hardly in spring training, that the game really hasn't started yet, where, quite frankly, there's not loads of deal making going on in the content space, if you will, right now. And so, that's, I think, probably interesting if you're a strategist, that it hasn't been figured out such that, it's not a hard business. And we're trying to cooperate with lots of other technologies out there. So what we're seeing, I'll mention Dysonics is one, Visisonics is another, company called Two Big Ears out of Scotland that Facebook just bought about 2 months ago. So these are all different types of 3D audio solutions. They all don't do the same thing. Some might work just for speakers. Some might have solutions that work across speakers and headsets and in the car, basically. So it's really a time right now to cooperate and create cooperative alliances, as opposed to say, one party has plunked the 3D audio technology out of the market and that's it, basically. So I actually think that's kind of a cool time if you're a business developer. This was just mentioned actually by the content person, but what we're seeing in the market with 3D audio right now is, and I think it's almost like sort of the reception we're getting here and around the country. You really can't force something on an existing business. So for music, for example, they've prepped their catalogs for all their major digital vendors, as have the film studios. And it's going to be hard to go to a major interest as Sony or Universal and say, we want you to encode your entire catalog for 3D audio. You're probably not going to be able to do that because they've invested a lot, just for Apple and Amazon and Spotify. And I think fidelity isn't as much of a priority for some of those interests that are out there. So, what we're trying to do is figure out cooperative ways to work. And when you're in front of, say, a major film producer, a director, you do want to try and spend some money to integrate with their Pro Tools and not ask them to invest a massive amount of capital in something that is quite new, basically. So that's been a big challenge, basically. Yeah, and I think really it's more about partnerships right now. Like I can't tell you, the way I could say if someone wanted me to go through what a Spotify business model looks like and all the internal workings of how the dollars get split up, I could actually talk to you about how that works. But I don't know anyone who could talk to you about that in this space right now at all and tell you, what should a per unit licensing fee be for this technology with an HTC Vive, or if Magic Leap, which is a mixed reality player sitting in my state, I'm based in Florida, has over $1 billion of capital in it, wanted to use a 3D audio technology from the outside environment, what would that deal actually look like? And I don't know if anyone can say that right. I think what a lot of these technologies are trying to do are ally with each other, present themselves as a unified front to venture capitalists, and find partnerships to kind of justify what they're doing, basically. And the business model will kind of come later, basically. So that's sort of my comments. If you guys have any questions on this, feel free to fire away. Bearing in mind, I'm a biz dev guy, not an engineer. Okay.
I think a problem will be the technical side of the hardware. So if we really use VR and we turn around in the space, we either have to use better headsets with 3D audio in it, and I think there are not too many right now. Or we need a new stereo, or not stereo, but sound, and that tracks your position in the room and turns the completely sound right to your position. What do you think? What's the future of this?
I think it's a fundamental part of going forward for all these technologies to have. I think the real question is, does we just had an HTC up here, or obviously there's a Oculus is out there, right? And Magic Leap is out there. They're big incumbents. Sony obviously is in the market, I think, as well as HoloLens. These are all kind of big players that presumably will have some big interest in at least the hardware and reaching the consumer in terms of what you just described. So I think you probably have to ask the question: are they growing their own homegrown solution? Are they getting it from the market, or is there some place that's in between? I guess what I've seen so far is, I don't think there's an answer to any of those questions yet. I think there's the latter. You could use a technology like I just described in a complementary way to something you've grown. Facebook's, for example, Two Big Ears, I think, works on headphones, which is fundamental to VR, makes sense, or the VR headset. But you might not be able to put it on a Jambox or a JBL or a Bose speaker, or put it in the car like I just described to you. Or I asked HTC, there's no reason why this shouldn't be on a handset. The handset is a principal vehicle for audio consumption, basically. So I think there's a lot of landscape in there to play with eventually. And I actually, from what I've seen with the one audio technology I described, I don't think it creates some enormous price factor if you're incorporating your software, integrating it either, basically. I just think it's kind of early and to have those deals. So
yeah, I think you both raised some really good points. First of all, I think the biggest challenge is actually convincing people that audio is really important. I think that's the first challenge, because a lot of times developers and tech people who are more focused on the product itself they don't understand really how much high fidelity and spatialization adds to the experience. For instance, I've been working on a VR game, an indie VR game, for the past couple months, and I've kind of had to drag the developer, kicking and screaming, into the world of immersive audio. Yeah. So I think and now he's kind of like, oh, I understand now. So it's it's kind of like you have to be an educator, a preacher, so to speak, for this kind of new field for audio.
No, we're on the same, exactly, totally agree. And I think it may be a factor of the stage of the market that we're in right now, because I think the positioning of audio is completely fundamental to the experience. It really is. I think it's a little bit forgotten as sort of what the theme is here. It shouldn't be, basically. That's what we're calling it, missing link. Mm-hmm. So.
And for things that he was talking about, there's things like B format recording, but that still presents challenges, because if you wanted to sit in a room surrounded by speakers, you would still have to have like head tracking and
Yeah, well, right. Some
that
some
kind
of the
of
stuff I didn't get into it because I'm more of a business person. But when you start getting outside of the headset, I mean, binaural audio is actually best for the headset or headphones, basically. When you start getting out of that platform, if you will, if you wanted to try and do 3D audio on speakers, you have a phenomenon called crosstalk. Basically, the sound waves interfere with each other, and you hear a little bit of distortion. I mean, there are filters in the market now where they can reduce crosstalk so that it's almost like putting a mattress or something in front of your nose, and you can create that. But I don't think these things are popular yet. These are kind of rare things, and I think when you start talking, at least from a content perspective, about audio fidelity and high fidelity stuff, it really starts like being a real niche. I mean, a business person starts to think like this is a small segment of the market that would buy this. There's a company here in the Bay Area called Pono Music that Neil Young has created that is actually devoted to this idea of higher fidelity audio, that it's been lost basically. And it's an interesting company. It's a fully legitimate music store actually, and it sells higher fidelity audio tracks. I don't know if the price is maybe a little bit more. It's a little bit older school in its thinking because it's not streaming is considered the future of this business. But I think they're very strong believers in this, and they would, I think, would be a perfect candidate actually for something like this. But you're probably right to think about this that way.
One more
Who else?
comment.
Yeah. Let's work in the room, then you come back. Go ahead. Pono, P-O-N-O. Pono. They have like a player, a music player. It looks like a Toblerone bar. It looks like a little triangular device, basically. And it's not as big as Apple, obviously, but go ahead.
So from a business standpoint, with all the new technology that's coming out with VR headsets, Magic Leap and everything, what is the potential financial opportunity lost by not investing in quality 3D audio? And how would you recommend changing the audio last culture?
That's an excellent question. There was research released in Las Vegas at CES this year that looked at the notion of consumer interest in terms of purchasing music, and what would be the key factors that consumers would think about should they actually want to buy music. Because it's just crazy that buying and purchasing something is becoming so old school that you have to look at and research why people would want to buy. But I will tell you that audio fidelity was actually, I think, in the top 1 or 2 basically. So it rates very highly in terms of why people would want to actually value a music experience, whether it's streaming music that you're paying a fee for, whether you're buying it. So I think that's I can't give you a number in terms of what the future-looking net present value is or the lost opportunity, but I think it's quite large. I think I'll give you perspective when you're talking about recorded music. It used to be 15 years ago about 37, 38 billion top line in terms of sales. That includes the US and the globe. It's now less than half of that. The US is like 6 or 7 billion. So that specific area of content consumption, has shrunk dramatically. It's half the size it used to be. And the reason is that shift I showed in that slide away from purchasing and more towards the access of music, if you will. And so, I think the big bet that happened, at least in this country, we're about to wrap up, was that those streaming services would capture a lot of paying subscribers, basically. I think it's over 1 billion now, in maybe 2 or 3 billion in terms of U.S. sales, actually. So I would think it's at least 500 million you could add incrementally over the next couple of years if you had a gun to my head, saying what would be the value of implementing some great sounding services that had audio fidelity and artist engagement, a lot of other stuff in it as well. So thank you very much. Thanks a lot, you guys. Thanks for coming.